Blackberry, once the pinnacle of cell phone technology, first capturing the business crowd and later the general public, Blackberry was one of the most prominent smartphone brands in the world. Everything changed with the iPhone. The iPhone introduced a full multi-touch display with no physical keyboard, a fully functioning mobile browser, and an operating system that could do far more than any other smartphone at the time. BlackBerry executives mocked the iPhone, and people said it would never be able to compete, especially in the business world. Boy, were they wrong. In 2015, BlackBerry shifted their business strategy to focus on Android smartphones, but with some of BlackBerry's security software built in. One of the phones spawned from this new business strategy was the Blackberry KEYone, which focused on a physical keyboard and a rugged design. This is William from Wink Tech, and in this video I'll be taking a look at the Blackberry KEYone and whether or not this device is even usable in 2022. First of all, let's look at the design of the KEYone. The first thing I notice is how thick and rugged it is. It has an aluminum body with a soft touch rubber back. On the front you will find the selfie camera, an IR sensor, a notification light which you don't see much anymore, and of course the display and a physical keyboard, with the fingerprint sensor neatly integrated into the spacebar. This is definitely not the prettiest looking phone, but there's one thing for sure, this thing can survive more than a few drops. The looks aren't the only downside to this design though. The fact that there is a keyboard on the front of the device that doesn't slide makes for a display that is very small at 4.5 inches. This also means that things like watching a video is very awkward because the screen is off to one side and is also not a 16:9 aspect ratio. So all the content is going to be even smaller with black bars constantly. This display is OLED, so it's not too much of an issue in the dark, but it's still annoying using the phone in landscape orientation for pretty much anything. Next, let's take a look at the specs. The KEYone is rocking a Snapdragon 625, 3GB of RAM for the 32GB model, or 4GB for the 64GB model, which is a bit of an odd choice. It also has a 3500 mAh battery, a 12 megapixel camera, and a 4.5-inch 1080x1620 display. These specs, even for 2017, wasn't fantastic. Their performance was okay at best, but using it now, it feels very slow. Not only does the Snapdragon 625 hold it back, but it uses eMMC storage instead of NVMe, which is much slower. For real-world use, this means a lot of apps and programs will load slower than newer and more expensive smartphones. On Geekbench 4, the KEYone scores 873 for single-core and 3765 for multi-core performance. For comparison, the Samsung Galaxy S8, which was released the same year, scores 1976 for single-core and 6342 for multi-core, so in other words, double the performance. While the KEYone was not a top-of-the-line smartphone, it was not cheap either at a launch price of $550. The Galaxy S8 started at $720. The performance isn't great, but what about the battery life? Well, since it has a 3500 mAh battery and doesn't use a super power-hungry chip, battery life is actually pretty good. It can easily last a day for me, and it has a decently fast charging up to 18 watts, which is the same as the latest iPhone. Though one disappointing aspect is the lack of wireless charging, even though the back is not metal. For most people it is not super important, but it would have been nice to have for the BlackBerry fans out there. On the plus side, it does use USB-C for charging, which is something we can't even say for the newest iPhones. One thing you might be wondering is if this phone is really a BlackBerry if it runs Android. To be honest, I thought the same thing, but it does come with some of BlackBerry's own apps and software. Thankfully, what BlackBerry is using here is pretty close to stock Android with some of their own tweaks and pre-installed apps. One thing they included, which you can disable, is a little tab on the side, and when you swipe you could see things like calendar, messages, to-do list, and contacts list. You can tell this is very oriented towards business people. Personally, I don't find this very useful, but if you use these functions a lot, then you might like it. The next feature I want to talk about is probably my favorite thing about this phone, and that is shortcuts. When you're on the home screen, you can map any key on the physical keyboard to open any app. With the press of a single key, you can instantly open any app, which is awesome. In addition to the key shortcuts, there's an extra button on the right side that is also mappable to anything. For example, I mapped the C key to Chrome and the Y key to YouTube. Honestly, this might be the biggest advantage to a physical keyboard on a smartphone. As for the pre-installed apps, these are a bit less useful in my opinion. It's mostly utilities like Notes, Radio, Password Keeper, an app for hiding info and screenshots, privacy window, and stuff like that. The most useful app they have is probably Detect, which includes a bunch of security features such as data encryption and antivirus. You can tell BlackBerry is reaching a bit for their once coveted security, but since they're using Android as the OS, naturally their new phone will not be as secure as the old ones running BlackBerry OS. And as it turns out, BlackBerry recently stopped support for the old BlackBerry OS. It's a bit sad to think about, but at some point BlackBerry has to move on. Overall, I would say the software is pretty usable, but comes with a lot of bloat that most people won't use or care about. Although it's not necessarily a bad thing considering how niche this phone is in the first place. Finally, let's talk about the camera. The camera is, as you would expect from a BlackBerry, not great. Everything from the image processing to the colors is just bad. If you have a lot of great lighting, you can get a decent shot, but in low light, it really struggles. I also found that it had really poor HDR with blown out highlights and shadows with no detail whatsoever. Additionally, I found the red color in particular to be bad. It just looks very saturated for some reason. The video is not any better. It does 4K at 30 FPS, but 4K doesn't necessarily mean it looks good. For video, it's all about the processing, and the Snapdragon 625 is not doing the camera any favors in that department. Needless to say, the video from this camera does not look great either. All in all, the Blackberry KEYone is not a great smartphone, and it wasn't when it came out either. However, it was meant to be a niche phone to begin with, and it was to appease the few physical keyboard users there are in the world. I'm not gonna lie, I still see people in public who use the KEYone and the KEY2, because yes, there are still people who swear by the physical keyboard. Some are faster on them than software keyboards, which is quite impressive if you ask me. With abysmal specs, a mediocre camera, a small screen, and bloated software, the KEYone was not great for the average consumer. But if you are one of those dedicated BlackBerry fans who are still stuck on the physical keyboard, then the Blackberry KEYone was a godsend. Well, that's about it for this video. Let me know in the comments, do you know anyone who still uses a BlackBerry? And what do you think of their attempts at an Android smartphone? If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and consider subscribing for more content like this. Anyway, this has been William from Wing Tech, and I'll see you in the next video.